All right, back to it. Next topic is evolution. In schools across the United States and around the world, evolution is propped up as the leading theory as to how life came to be from a scientific perspective. I put that scientific in quotes, and you'll see why in a moment. It is preached as gospel from the pulpits of classrooms across the nation. Why the direct allusion to religion? Because if it was to be taught from a neutral perspective, as all scientific theories should be, objections to evolution should be brought to the forefront in the classroom along with other leading theories on the origins of life. That means theism. Unfortunately, this is not the case. Evolution is almost exclusively taught as absolute fact. The only questions typically allowed of evolution are the particular details and mechanisms that allow for life to evolve. Fortunately, Christian apologists have brought up several objections which are unanswerable given the current state of the theory. I will go through some of the most common ones along with my own objections below in the interest of educational neutrality. First, however, we need to review a couple of terms. Taxonomic rank or level. In the classification of living creatures, there are 8 ranks: domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Lower ranks are more general with respect to how living creatures are related. For example, mammals fall into the same class, which is the 4th rank. So things get far more specific as you ascend to the 8th rank, which is species. Conversely, changes to lower ranks are larger evolutionary hurdles since it implies bigger changes between species. So if we were to go from one domain to another, there would have to be a major evolutionary leap. Transitional or intermediate forms. These are species that have similarities to more than one other species and help link them together. If a transitional form of life is missing, we call it a missing link. Organelles. These are specialized structures within a cell that perform distinct functions similar to how organs function in the body. Good. Now that we're on the same page, let's go through the objections. Number 1. The vast majority of transitional forms are missing from the fossil record. The fossil record shows some examples of transitional forms of life, but around 99% of expected intermediaries are missing. That means they're missing links, possibly due to incomplete preservation or rapid evolutionary bursts. But this contradicts the idea that higher level of taxonomic changes occur over long time scales. Paleontologists estimate that only about 1 to 5% of species are fossilized due to rare conditions, i.e. rapid burial and other things that are necessary for a fossil to emerge, leading to inherent incompleteness. However, there are other issues with incompleteness. For example, at the microscopic level, the vast number of organisms should produce observable transitional forms if evolution is continuous, but gaps still persist. This leads to another issue. Number 2, we have never observed major taxonomic changes, even in rapidly evolving microorganisms. While microevolutionary changes like speciation, i.e. new species within a genus, have been observed in labs and in nature, there have never been any direct real-time observations of shifts across higher taxonomic levels. For example, prokaryotes to eukaryotes, or from one phylum to another. Even in fast-evolving microbes, documented adaptations remain within species. This brings into doubt whether or not microprocesses can accumulate and cause changes from one kingdom or domain to another. Lab examples of successful evolution include speciation in fruit flies after about 35 generations and speciation of bacteria over around 70,000 generations. This, coupled with the majority of missing transitional forms of life, throw evolution further into doubt. This is without addressing the fact that we're assuming these mutations can lead to an increase in complexity, number 1, and this also introduces the issue of increases in complexity slowing both reproduction and thereby evolution. To expand on this idea of effective rate of reproduction, we can look at prokaryotes and eukaryotes. Prokaryotes can reproduce in about 20 minutes, whereas eukaryotes typically take longer, around 90 minutes for species like yeast, showing that added complexity comes at a cost. It is true that in some cases, greater complexity can lead to faster reproduction, but this is typically the exception, not the rule. This leads to my next point. Number 3. Just based on the principle of entropy alone, we should expect greater disorder, not greater order over time, especially in larger species. Case in point, genetic information tends to degrade over time, not increase in complexity. For example, the reason we die is because of entropy's effect on our body over time, causing cancer and other disorders as we grow older. These accumulate and eventually the body breaks down. Now, in closed systems, the second law of thermodynamics states that entropy, which is disorder, tends to increase, meaning biological evolution, which posits increasing complexity from single-celled to multi-celled organisms, violates this principle. Proponents of evolution would argue that evolution occurs in an open system, not a closed system, meaning the laws of entropy do not apply. However, this is inaccurate. The Earth is a closed system. The issue is not impossibilities and ideal circumstances over all time in an infinite space. The issue is instead that there are prevalent, non-ideal circumstances limiting the locations in which evolution could take place, combined with a finite time period, i.e. the age of the Earth, which is around 11 billion years. This is further limited by impossible surface conditions during the early development of the Earth for evolution to take place. At a minimum, according to the fossil record, scientists estimate that all life formed over a period of around 4.5 billion years. This leads to extreme statistical unlikelihood, and we will prove this by digging into each of these issues while continuing this discussion. As previously mentioned, at the genetic level, mutations caused by environmental factors like radiation or oxidation are often deleterious, potentially leading to loss of function or simplification rather than novel complexity. This could imply a tendency toward de-evolution or stasis, especially if harmful mutations accumulate faster than beneficial ones. Think of it like a game of telephone. The message whispered into the ear of the first person is rarely the same as the one spoken at the end of the line, and the end message is typically simpler than the original message. A direct example of this principle can be easily found in larger organisms, where mutations often lead to disorders, as I previously mentioned, with few examples of constructive changes enabling higher taxonomic shifts. This throws further into question whether or not it's possible for complex changes to occur without causing overwhelming harm. For example, estimates from a study conducted by Eyre, Walker, and Knightley in 2007, which was published in Nature Reviews Genetics, suggest 70 to 90% of mutations are neutral or deleterious in humans, with beneficial ones rare, 0.1 to 1%, raising questions about the possibility of net gains in complexity. Even with a 50-50 likelihood of beneficial mutations in simple life forms, it is exceedingly unlikely that life could evolve into a complex state within the volumetric and time constraints of the Earth. To press this further, we need to discuss straight-line evolution. In school, we're often taught that evolution is branching, but it is heavily implied that it is ever advancing to a more and more complex state of life. This, however, is not true. Simpler, faster reproducing life forms often dominate due to lower resource needs and quicker replication rates. This ties back to my point about more advanced species or larger species taking longer to evolve. If you've ever heard the saying, if you want to go fast, travel light, that mantra applies here. This tendency reduces incentives for complexity, as added structures like organelles can slow reproduction without immediate advantages in competitive environments, potentially favoring lightweight simplicity over intricate adaptations. For larger species, survival of the fittest might imply that species with greater strength or intelligence survive, but this does not apply at the microscopic scale. Now let's talk about statistics and probabilities. Now let's put some of these numbers to concepts. Let's start with a hypothetical organism that we want to evolve from one part, which is a simple organism, to 200 parts, a still simple but relatively more complex organism, right? Even assuming the 50% beneficial mutations from earlier in a rate of mutation of one mutation every half second, which is incredibly generous, and this is for a single organism, the odds are 1 in 10 to the 60th that these mutations can complete a 200-part organism over the age of the Earth, the entire age, 11 billion years, not 4.5 billion. However, given the size of the Earth, the chances for this hypothetical organism from 1 part to 200 parts can be adjusted to a whopping 1 in 10 to the 21. Let me bring back my college phrase from earlier. This is statistically zero. Now to put this in perspective, the simplest organism on the planet is actually an STD called Mycoplasma genitalium. It has over 580,000 base pairs constituting its DNA. That is a far cry from 200. Overall, estimates for evolution to be possible within the timescale of the Earth are between 1 in 10 to the 30th, and this is according to Harold Morowitz and his estimate from his book Energy Flow in Biology, published in 1968, to 1 in 10 to the 1018th. And this is according to a paper published by Eugene Koonin in 2007. This value boggles the mind. However, it should be noted that the higher probability I just listed relies on catalysts to expedite evolution, stacking one assumption onto another to increase the likelihood dramatically without evaluating the likelihood that these catalysts were even present. They are assumed as an absolute fact without being included as a statistical variable. These numbers also rely on another silent assumption: models of a young Earth that favors evolution. Until today, we do not have, nor could we have, with our current technology, any detailed study or accurate representation of the early moments of life supporting planets such as Earth. All of our knowledge is based solely on models. These models are incredibly simplistic compared to the complex reality of the chaotic process by which the Earth was formed. The chances these models are correct are as unlikely, if not more unlikely, than evolution itself. Think of it for a moment. When is the last time you relied on a weather prediction and it was wrong? Those weather predictions are based on faulty models because they have to be simplified to the level where men can comprehend them and the computer can calculate them. Much the same when it comes to models regarding the formation of planets. Ask any scientist and they will tell you that truthfully we cannot even model the dynamics of air when a person takes a breath on the granular level of atoms. In fact, if you've ever heard of the concept of the butterfly effect, it is a metaphorical expression of this uncertainty. I'll be completely honest here. It is beyond the level of embarrassing for this to be considered a legitimate scientific field of study. As a scientist myself who passed the PhD exam in my field at Georgia's Institute of Technology, both oral and written, on the first attempt, I am appalled that evolution is even considered remotely likely by the scientific community, much less taught in schools. You might as well be teaching children to believe in unicorns and fairy dust. And I know this is the attack commonly used by atheists against Christians. I return it to you. I'm ashamed to admit that I once thought there was a possibility that directed evolution, as in evolution used as a mechanism by God, was a possibility based on my readings of Genesis. But now, having looked into it, I recant that possibility altogether, both as a Christian and as a scientist. It would take me far more faith to believe in evolution than it does for me to believe in God. I would quite literally check myself into a mental hospital before I started to believe in evolution. Now, there's a reason I go to such lengths to disavow this theory. Several Christians, even here in the United States, have been prosecuted in court over mentioning the possibility of there being a God in a classroom. If we are truly going to prosecute people for bringing religion into classrooms, then every single proponent of evolution, those who teach it, those who pass policy for it to be taught, belong in the lowest prison cells in our nation. I, for one, am not too concerned about the prosecution, however. If they don't turn away from this ridiculous delusion, there won't be any escape from the prison cell they will ultimately be thrown into. I hope for them and others to avoid it. Anyway, moving on from this topic, which I've beaten to death at this point, I'd briefly like to address other explanations for how life came to exist. Have you ever heard of the idea that we are all in the Matrix? Literally, I'm not joking. This is called simulation theory. And as the title would suggest, it's the idea that reality is a simulation. The details of this theory vary. Some say that when you die, you wake up in the real world. Others say that when you die, your body is disregarded and all that awaits is the nothing. Another version of this idea is that any one of us or all of us could be brains in a vat. The only difference with this theory is the assumed conditions. Obviously, none of this is provable, nor is there any way to disprove it without relying on near-death experiences, which is a subject for later. One final explanation for the existence of life is the idea that our planet was seeded by aliens, and I know if any Christians are listening to this right now, their eyes are rolling into the back of their heads. But bear with me for the sake of the atheists and agnostics who may just need that final push to listen to reason. Anyway, my question to those who believe in aliens seeding the planet is, what is the difference between aliens and angels? What is the difference between magic and technology? The common complaint is that one is supernatural, which makes them borderline unprovable, and the other is flesh and bone like us. However, this doesn't stand up to scrutiny at all. Even in Star Trek, multiple alien species like the Q travelers are multidimensional beings beyond our understanding, and essentially undetectable unless they desire to step into our four known dimensions. The idea that these aliens must follow physical rules is incorrect. On a semi-related note, to quote Arthur C. Clarke in his book Profiles of the Future, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Now let's do a thought experiment. Take any person from an era prior to the 19th and 20th centuries and teleport them forward in time to now. What do you think their reaction would be? Indeed, they would look at us all like wizards, and our technology to them would be indistinguishable from magic. To be completely fair, very few of us, even today, completely understand the full complexity of the technology we use. Our phones and computers are black boxes akin to magic itself, and we are on the precipice of new types of technologies far more advanced. Quantum computing, AI. In the near future, humans won't even need to program the machines, they will program themselves. Then who will be left to understand what the machines have built? And yet, at this point in time, we have no chance of reaching the nearest star in the lifetime of any individual. Now imagine a species so advanced that they can travel between stars like they're walking through doorways. There would be no telling what they could do, how they could appear, or what intention they could have. To them, our world could be a playground where they come and go regularly, or perhaps it's a battleground where angels and demons war over the souls of men. My only point in bringing this all up is to break down the barrier between how we distinguish supernatural from natural. We already live in a supernatural world. It is only a step further to believe in a supernatural God who created our universe and all that is in it. Anyway, this is going to be where I break this session, and I'll go into my third video in a little bit. I hope you guys have a blessed day. If you're watching this, I encourage you to go watch the third video because it's going to be on historical evidence of the Bible. Anyway, thanks for watching.